So John Walsh has spent 40 years in journalism. He's been literary editor of the Evening Standard, the Sunday Times and Independent, and a panelist on Radio 4's quiz, The Right Stuff. He's published 2 memoirs and a novel, Sunday at the Crossbones. Tonight, John is going to be reading from his new book, The Golden Page, Adventures in the Literary Jungle, 1978 to 1993. Welcome, John.
Hi there. Thanks very much for letting me do this. I haven't actually revealed any of this book to anybody until now. And it's about the golden years of the 80s when there was this explosion of talented novelists everywhere, and also a kind of revolution in how readers could actually consume their stuff, from things like, the Waterstones explosion, the Hale and Wye festivals, all that stuff. Anyway, this extract here is about the days before the explosion, the old-fashioned stuff. So it's chapter 3, the beginning. I knocked on the door of the old London publishing world in 1978. I was 24 and going for my second job. My first job had been on a Catholic weekly magazine called The Tablet, where I found myself selling advertising space to nuns. It was interesting work, but I felt I was slightly wasting my 2 degrees from Oxford and Dublin. So when I saw in the Bookseller magazine a job going in the publicity department of Victor Gollancz Limited, I jumped at it. I went along to their premises just off the Strand for an interview. In the reception area, a droopy woman with a cameo brooch on her cardigan announced herself as Margot and asked me to wait before returning to her conversation on an ancient Bakelite telephone, the kind whose metallic dialing circle had little holes for the finger to tickle. I was interviewed by 2 women. One was Nellie Flexner, head of publicity, a quizzical late 20s American with jet black hair, piercing eyes, and the whitest skin I've ever seen. The other was Liz Calder, the firm's editorial director, a dazzling redhead in her late 30s with Russian model cheekbones, crimson lipstick, and a faint trace of Kiwi in her cool, sardonic voice. They were an attractive double act, their sharp wits a contrast to the schoolgirl informality of their names. Nellie and Liz were clearly as smart as Pythagoras and as unsusceptible to my boyish charms as Andrea Dworkin. Nellie had a habit of wrinkling her white brow at all my replies, while Liz let a disbelieving smile play around her carmine lips. They asked about my life and mocked my replies. When I explained that my MA thesis had explored the late prose of Samuel Beckett, they said, "You'll need to lower your brow to read our crime and sci-fi books." When I announced my devotion to modern fiction, they said, "Look, if you're hoping to join it, if you're hoping to add to it, you can do that at home, not in the office." When I mentioned my passionate interest in helping works of literature reach the best readers, they said, "You'll probably spend more time helping our children's books reach 5-year-olds. After 20 minutes, they suggested I meet some other staff members. So we ascended a flight of stairs with a faded brown carpet and oak banisters that clearly dated back a half century. In the kind of office you associate with the headmaster's study, I met the managing director, John Bush, a preoccupied-seeming white-haired cove with a tick of fluttering eyelids and an abrupt manner. He didn't have many questions for me. Mainly, he wanted to confirm that I lived in London and would be available for evening parties, promotional events, and so forth. I said, "I'd love to." "Married?" he barked. "No," I said. "Gay?" he barked. "I beg your pardon?" He glared at me through rimless spectacles. "Are you engaged?" I said. "Oh, no," I said. I paused. Although I thought he said, "Are you gay?" "Did you now?" said Mr. "Did you now?" Nellie and Liz mentioned something about my academic background, how I was overqualified but keen. He muttered some reply. He specialized in a kind of abrupt mutter. "Better eat Nivea," I thought I heard him say. 5 minutes later, I was heading up another set of stairs, even dustier and narrower than the first, leading to what? The servants' quarter? An attic where some latter-day Mrs. Rochester had been imprisoned since the 1870s? Or was it the Gollancz Holy of Holies? Well, it was the latter. The rickety door opened onto a cozy Edwardian parlor, Dickensianly crammed to bursting with books, magazines, newspapers, a 3-bar electric fire, an elderly Xerox machine, files, boxes, and everywhere toppling pagodas of manuscript pages. It was dominated by a huge desk on which an ancient black Remington typewriter held center stage, and seated behind it was an extraordinary figure, something out of Hans Christian Andersen. Livia Gollancz, I think Mr. Bush said, "Better meet Livia." Livia Gollantz's penetrating blue eyes, set in the face of an Eastern European peasant woman, regarded me sternly. A frizz of steely grey hair gave her enormous head a penumbral halo. She sat bolt upright, not exactly hostile to my arrival so much as baffled as to why an unfamiliar youth had been ushered into her presence. Cleopatra, I thought, might have worn that expression if a young Alexandrian pot washer had been brought to her boudoir. Boadicea would certainly have had that look had some grubby teenage chariot wrangler suddenly materialized in her chamber. "This is John Walsh, Livia," said Liz, giving me a sweet nod of encouragement. "He may be joining the publicity department if all goes well." She rose and stood before me, an awesome sight. Victor Gollantz's daughter seemed at least 6 feet tall, commanding, unsmiling, majestic. Among the many images that flashed through my head was that of the Duchess in Alice in Wonderland, broad-faced, elaborately hatted, blankly unsmiling. The alarm I felt beneath her gaze was mitigated by the clothes she wore. She had chosen on that April morning to dress herself in a thin oatmeal sweater and a long, black, heavy woolen skirt. Her top half seemed to anticipate warm weather, her bottom half winter. "Do you," she boomed, icily polite, "do you know anything about typography?" Well, I couldn't see what relevance typefaces could have to the workings of a publicity department, but I felt it better to keep the thought to myself. "I know about italics," I said feebly, "and upper and lower case, and somebody once explained to me what sans serif is, but I'm afraid beyond that." "But this is marvelous," she said, her great broad face breaking into a charming smile. "If you know the difference between them, it puts you at a huge advantage in this industry." "Well, I suppose. Good day, Mr. Walsh," she said abruptly, and sat back down, her attention fully returned to the letter she'd been reading when I came in. To my delight, I got the job and gradually discovered how the company works. This was a world that predated computers. In the production office, the complicated schedule of dates for setting up the company's output of new books in proof, then final pages, then binding and jacketing, was all laid out on the wall in surprisingly homemade-looking cardboard sheets with pockets attached. More surprising in its grim antiquity was the counting house, an area where a telephone operator manned an actual switchboard. Back when Gollantz started life in 1928, it had been the room where the company accounts and cash were kept. Apparently, no one had ever thought to have it stripped, replastered, repainted, and repurposed as something modern with, photocopiers and electronica. The publicity office was often chilly in the mornings, but I was kept warm by my frequent trips up and down stairs. Nobody had mentioned that part of my job would be full-time flunky and dog's body to Livia Gollantz. Mid-morning, a red telephone behind my desk would shrill abruptly, and her deep, imperious voice on the line would say, "Come!" I'd gallop up the stairs to her office, where she'd hand me a sheet of paper to take to the printers in Fleet Street. On the sheet, I'd read her plain as a pikestaff advertising copy, handwritten in the blackest ink. "The Ampersand Papers by Michael Innes. Who stole the Byron and Shelley manuscripts from a locked room in a Cornish castle? An absorbing mystery from a leading British crime writer. Gollantz, $5.95. She always chose the same fonts for every advertisement. They were called Gill and Grot, like a sort of Beckett play. The former was the invention of Eric Gill, the brilliant but deeply peculiar sculptor and printmaker, whose biography revealed that he had sex with both his sisters, his 2 eldest daughters, and the unfortunate family dog. The latter typeface was a contraction of grotesque, invented in Sheffield. I don't believe Livia had the faintest clue about the sexual associations of the former or the dark provenance of the latter. I think she just liked using the plainest sounding typefaces on the market. She was a very basic person and a no-frills publisher. She clung to her father Victor's insistence that Gollantz's books were so starkly distinctive in their yellow livery, they needed no arty or even coloured dust jackets. Like him, she flatly refused to introduce paperbacks to the company's operations, and she certainly didn't believe in paying fancy advances, even to successful, in-demand novelists. She never took authors out to lunch and only grudgingly allowed launch parties for the stars of Gollantz's list. When I was told to arrange a launch party for Angela Carter's The Bloody Chamber and booked the sunny terrace of a modest Italian restaurant in Fleet Street, I was ticked off as though I'd booked the dining room at the Savoy for the whole day and night. In meetings, Livia was blunt to the point of rudeness. If somebody talked for longer than she deemed reasonable, she would reach into her capacious carrier bag, extract a fistful of the spring onions she grew in her back garden, tear the hairy tendrils off the top with her fingers, and noisily munch the remainder until the garrulous committee member had lapsed into silence. I gradually learned about her, salad days. When young, she was an accomplished player of the French horn. By 20, she was playing in the London Symphony Orchestra, At 23, she saw a job going for a principal horn at the Halle Orchestra in Manchester. She telephoned their headquarters, got through to the musical director, Sir John Barbarolli, and demanded the job at a salary of £2 a week. Sir John said yes. People generally did with Livia. It saved time. Of her other, last paragraph, her other major talents I soon became aware. On the second day I was there, as I prepared to leave at work at 6 p.m., I heard a scary noise coming from upstairs, a faint but spine-tingling wail, as though an unusually lamentatious banshee had just received some really atrocious news. I opened the office door and found the racket wasn't coming from the first floor, but higher up. Apprehensively, I climbed the stair, turned at the corner, and realized that the noise, with its graduated rise that hit a curiously orgasmic top note, was Livia performing arpeggios in her study with the door ajar. I marveled at her weirdness and her witchiness, but also at her chutzpah in making sure the whole company knew she had a trained operatic voice and she wasn't afraid to use it. There.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Lots and lots of comments. Rod Donahue, I'm smiling all the way through this. Me too, Tim Addis. So vivid. From Kate Birch. Okay, this is wonderful, lively and engaging from Laurel, loving it. I don't think you appreciated the possibility of selling advertising to nuns from Sue Hubbard. Laurel noted that it had brilliant, these people have such wonderful names, and Tom thought it was a brilliant title. I think I've got everyone.
Thank you. I'm absolutely bowled over. That's really lovely of you. Thank you so much.
And everyone's saying, oh, someone said that you should be, that they hope you'll be reading the audio. I can't remember who that was. But they said that the audio book, it needs to be you reading it. So I thought that was a great and well deserved. Yeah, excellent.
It is amazing. Thank you very much.
And James Dermott, thank you for your kind comments. For enjoying this meeting, and I must admit we've got a bit of time now anyway, but I must admit I'm amazed how popular it's proved. So, and it does look like we're going to be here next month. So